met Gerry back several years ago when we invited him to come down to my hometown, Corvallis, Oregon, and he was speaking about war resistance. And Gerry has a long history of personal war resistance, and he founded an organization called Project Safe Haven to help support people who are resisting these immoral, illegal wars. And so we kept in good touch with Gerry. And then last year, I was the president of Veterans for Peace. And one of the smartest things I did while I was the president was to appoint Gerry to our board of directors. So he's been on the board and is a vital member of our board, working, really concentrating on Bradley Manning and GI resistance and many other aspects. But he's a huge part of what makes VFP run. And I'm proud to introduce my friend and peer, Gerry Condon.
Thank you. I'm actually very happy to be serving on the National Board of Veterans for Peace with Leah Bolger and Mike Harrington, who's in the room. We also have quite a few VFPers right here in the room right now. Ken Mayer, Will Covert, Wade Fulmer from Columbia, South Carolina, John Spitzer from Asheville, North Carolina. We even claim Ann Wright as one of our own, as everybody does. And I'm sure there's others. Helen Jackard, my partner, who's an associate member of Veterans for Peace. Veterans for Peace, among other things, we're very clear we support war resistors, not war criminals. And we actually have been very strong supporters of Bradley Manning from about the first time his name hit the news. At our national convention in August of 2010 in Portland, Maine, we we gave an award, we called it the Courage of Conscience Award to Bradley Manning. And that was even before people really knew too much about it. He was the alleged WikiLeaks leaker. And support for him over the last few years, as he himself refused to be part of torture, is one of the many claims that we can make for Bradley Manning. He refused to be part of torture because some of the intelligence he was developing in Iraq was being used to arrest nonviolent critics of the government and who were then tortured. And you know, for having refused to participate in torture and war crimes, Bradley Manning himself was, as most of you know, was tortured for a number of months through solitary confinement and quite a bit of abuse. And so I'm here today. I'm going to be using my time to bring Bradley into the room, as well as another war resistor, Kimberly Rivera, who is facing court-martial actually next week. And she's a mother of 4 young children who refused to, she served in Iraq for 6 months and came home on leave and decided she couldn't in good conscience go back. She and her husband and their children, I think they had 2 at the time, went to Toronto, drove to Toronto, Canada, and sought asylum there. Canada, the Canadian people, as during the Vietnam War, have been great friends of our war resistors. But unlike during the Vietnam War, the Canadian government has not. So it's been a very difficult struggle for those who've gone to Canada and tried to remain. They couldn't immigrate easily. They've had to apply for refugee status, and they've been systematically denied that refugee status. There's been a strong movement in Canada with over 60% of the Canadian people supporting the war resistors, and motions have been passed in the Parliament calling on the government to grant them humanitarian asylum, and the conservative government of Canada has refused. They've been actually openly hostile to the war resistors, and several have been deported, including most recently Kimberly Rivera. Justin Colby, another Iraq war resistor who sought refuge in Canada, recently turned himself back into the U.S., and he was recently court-martialed, sentenced to 9 months in prison up at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington. So we have many other war resistors who are struggling to stay in Canada, including my friend Rodney Watson, another Iraq veteran who refused to redeploy to Iraq, and he was ordered deported from Canada 3.5 years ago. And instead of complying and coming back to the U.S., he sought sanctuary in a church, the United Church of Christ, I think it is, in downtown Vancouver, British Columbia. And believe it or not, he's been living in that church now for 3.5 years. And if you want to know more about Rodney or even talk to him, he carries on a pretty active conversation with supporters and friends on Facebook at his Facebook page, War Resistor in Sanctuary. And then another African-American Iraq veteran, war resistor, Andre Shepard, is seeking political asylum in Germany. And Helen and I were able to visit him last year. And he's actually been finally denied political asylum, but he's appealing. He is married now to a German woman, and probably will be able to remain even if he loses the appeal. But he thinks it's a very important principle as well as a very important precedent. Of course, it would be a pretty incredible precedent for Germany with tens of thousands of U.S. troops stationed there to grant asylum to a U.S. soldier. We'll see how that goes. But at any rate, I really want to spend the majority of my time actually reading from Bradley Manning's statement to the court recently as a historic statement, prior to, and also to read recent words from Kimberly Rivera. Bradley, of course, before, as I said, he was the alleged WikiLeaks whistleblower. Some people actually didn't know whether or how to support him because they didn't know whether he was really the one, and then there was questions about what is his motivation. And of course, the U.S. government and their friends in the mainstream media were spinning all kinds of perverse theories about what motivated Bradley, and that they were casting him in the worst light possible. So here's some. But Bradley actually read a document, read his own words in court in I believe it was early March, late February, early March, and it was over a 1 hour. It took him over 1 hour to read that statement. The prosecution tried to keep him from even being able to read that statement, calling it irrelevant. But fortunately, they were overruled by the judge. So this is Bradley Manning in his own words. And I think when you hear these words, you'll even be more motivated to support him, especially on June 1st, where Veterans for Peace, the Bradley Manning Support Network, Code Pink, and, well, everybody in the peace movement and the progressive movement is going to be out there with one big rally outside of Fort Meade, Maryland, which is very close to Baltimore and not far from Washington, D.C. That's where his court-martial will begin on Monday, June 3rd. So Saturday, June 1st, we really encourage everybody to make extra effort to get to Fort Meade, Maryland, and be part of a huge rally, because this is a rally not just to save Bradley's life. After all, the government's trying to put him away for life. They've accused him of aiding the enemy, and they really want to lock him up for the rest of his life. For the simple act of telling the truth. So here's Bradley in his own words. Part of a 10,000 word statement. He says, I believed and still believe that the Iraq and Afghan war logs are two of the most significant documents of our time. I felt that we were risking so much for people that seemed unwilling to cooperate with us, leading to frustration and anger on both sides. I began to become depressed with the situation that we found ourselves increasingly mired in year after year. In attempting to conduct counterinsurgency, or CT, and counterinsurgency coin operations, we became obsessed with capturing and killing human targets on lists, ignoring the second and third order effects of accomplishing short-term goals and missions. I believed that if the general public, especially the American public, had access to the information contained within the Iraq and Afghan war logs, this could spark a domestic debate on the role of the military and our foreign policy in general, as well as it related to Iraq and Afghanistan. I felt this sense of relief by having the information, having WikiLeaks release this information. I felt I had accomplished something that allowed me to have a clear conscience based upon what I had seen and what I had read about and knew was happening in both Iraq and Afghanistan every day. The most alarming aspect of the video, to me, he's talking about the WikiLeaks video, that shows U.S. aerial weapons team gunning down civilians, including 2 Reuters journalists in Iraq. The most alarming aspect of the video to me was the seemingly delightful bloodlust the aerial weapons team seemed to have. They dehumanized the individuals they were engaging and seemed to not value human life, and referred to them as quote-unquote dead bastards, and congratulated each other on their ability to kill in large numbers. At one point in the video, there is an individual on the ground attempting to crawl to safety. These are still Bradley's words. The individual is seriously wounded. Instead of calling for medical attention to the location, one of the aerial weapons team crew members verbally asks for the wounded person to pick up a weapon so that he can have a reason to engage. For me, this seems similar to a child torturing ants with a magnifying glass. He goes on to say, I hoped that the public would be as alarmed as me about the conduct of the aerial weapons team crew members. I wanted the American public to know that not everyone in Iraq and Afghanistan were targets that needed to be neutralized, but rather people who were struggling to live in the pressure cooker environment of what we call asymmetric warfare. After the release, I was encouraged by the response in the media and the general public who observed the aerial weapons team video. As I hoped, others were just as troubled, if not more troubled than me, by what they saw. During 2007, I was on a number of different bases. Oh, excuse me, wrong person. Okay, this is very important piece here because it relates to torture. On March 2nd, 2010, Bradley was ordered to investigate the Iraqi Federal Police's detention of 15 individuals for distributing quote-unquote anti-Iraqi literature. He quickly realized, quote, none of the individuals had previous ties to anti-Iraqi actions or suspected terrorist militia groups, unquote. In fact, the literature these academics were distributing was, quote, according to Bradley, merely a scholarly critique, unquote, of the, quote, corruption within the cabinet of Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's government and the financial impact of his corruption on the Iraqi people. So Bradley brought this to the attention of his superiors, but they told him to drop it and help the Iraqi people find more of these dissidents to detain. Bradley says, I knew if I continued to assist the Baghdad Federal Police in identifying the political opponents of Prime Minister al-Maliki, those people would be arrested and in the custody of the special unit of the Baghdad Federal Police and very likely tortured and not even seen again for a very long time, if ever. Instead of assisting the Baghdad Federal Police, I decided to take the information and expose it to WikiLeaks before the upcoming March 7th, 2010 election, hoping they could generate some immediate press on the issue and prevent the unit of the federal police from continuing to crack down on political opponents of al-Maliki. I always want to figure out the truth, said Bradley. Unlike other analysts in my section, or other sections, I was not satisfied with just scratching the surface and producing canned or cookie-cutter assessments. I wanted to know why something was the way it was and what we could do to correct or mitigate the situation. And then a little bit more here. How am I doing on time, Mike?
We've got about 8 minutes till the end of this section.
Okay, thank you. Talks about the diplomatic cables that he also released. He said, with my insatiable curiosity and interest in geopolitics, I became fascinated with them. I read not only the cables on Iraq, but also about other countries and events I found interesting. The more I read, the more I was fascinated by the way that we dealt with other nations and organizations. I also began to think that the documented backdoor dealings and seemingly criminal activity that didn't seem characteristic of the de facto leader of the free world. The more I read the cables, the more I came to the conclusion that this was the type of information that should become public. I once read and used a quote on open diplomacy written after the First World War, and how the world would be a better place if states would avoid making secret pacts and deals with and against each other. I thought these cables were a prime example of a need for a more open diplomacy. Okay, I'm not going to read more from Bradley right now, but this gives you a sense of what Bradley was thinking when he released these cables. Very clear, very conscientious, very courageous. So Bradley Manning really deserves all our support, and we cannot allow the government to put him away for the rest of his life. It's going to take a huge effort on all of our part, and I really think that everybody in the peace movement and all progressives should unite to defend this young man who's already suffered way too much for doing the right thing. Okay, now I want to come to one other very courageous woman, and once again, apologize, I'm going to be reading, but these are Kimberly Rivera's words, and as I said, she's facing, she's not being held in prison right now. They've reincorporated her into the Army, as they often do in these situations, put people in a very awkward situation, but she's at Fort Carson, Colorado, and she's going to be court-martialed on the 29th. That would be next Monday, I believe. And here's what she said just a few days ago. Actually, this was published yesterday. She says, I'm being charged with desertion with the intent to stay away and with shirking hazardous duty. I feel it shouldn't have come to this, or to any negative result for people to leave. If you are morally against what you're doing, and you don't believe in what you are doing, if you can't in your heart be able to harm another person but yourself, there should be a way out for people. I will be facing a sentence that is up to the judge and could be up to 5 years for what I know. My PTSD has been bad at times. In Canada, I was doing community volunteer work that helped me cope with it and calm me. I was helping in soup kitchens, working in the community garden, and was active in my kids' school. I also had counseling after my medication was not working properly, and I went to art workshops. To this day, I can't handle or hold a weapon without breaking into severe anxiety and nervousness. Since being back in the Army, I just go to work every day. Just plain soldier has been bringing up my anxiety. It's gotten worse as my trial gets closer. For a while they had me cleaning weapons, and that just made me more nervous and increasing my anxiety. They were having us clear them and test them for maintenance and malfunctions. One day, I almost passed out clearing weapons. speaks about her husband, Mario. Mario's health has been bad for a while, but he's trying to improve it without me at home. This is kind of like last night. Some of this is very emotional. Without me at home, it is difficult for him as he is taking care of 4 kids, and they take much of his time, most of his time. Having me home would help him. It would help my kids who miss me very much. Christian, these kids are like, infant to like 6, 4 kids, something like that. So, Christian, I think this is her oldest, is suffering with depression. Rebecca, the same. Kate keeps to herself and no longer opens up to anyone. She's having difficulties accepting that I will be gone for a while and tries to get me to come home. But I can't. It breaks my heart. She says that she needs to go and save me. Gabriel has stopped eating and is dependent on Pediasure for his nutrition. It is severely impacting him, negatively having me away. I was breastfeeding him until I had to come back to the U.S. and was detained at the border. He was very attached to me. They all were and still are. My mother-in-law has ended up in the hospital 2 times in the last month. Her health has been worsening. I'm thankful that Mario's parents, even with all their problems, do everything they can to help me, as well as my kids. The fact that I may be facing jail time breaks my mother-in-law's heart and also negatively affects her health. Doctors have told her not to stress or think about negative things and to stay calm, but she tells me, how can she, when her daughter is facing what she is? Mario's brother and father look after her and the kids currently. If I didn't have Mario here with me right now, I don't know how I would be. I'm thankful for that. I need to be back home to put my mother-in-law at ease, to help her, and to be with my kids so they can be happy again, and to help my husband, and we can be a family again. Just a little bit more here. I was given no alternatives or help by the chaplain before I went AWOL. When I would discuss my moral objection, I knew nothing about a conscience objector application, as that information was not readily available, and this is often the case, or at least it wasn't to me. Even with my objections, I received no reprieve, no options in any course to take. And now that I know about the length of the application process alone and how long it takes to be accepted or denied, I realize that can be discouraging to anyone. Then she talks about, what really triggered her conscience in Iraq. Quote, when I saw the little girl in Iraq shaking in fear of me because of my uniform, I couldn't fathom what she had been through, and all I saw was my little girl, and I just wanted to hold her and comfort her, but I knew I couldn't. It broke my heart. I am against hurting anyone. What I saw and felt and knew was that when it came down to it, I would not be able to harm anyone else, not for any reason. I would harm myself first. I felt this also made me a liability to my unit, and I could not let me be a reason for anyone to be harmed, so I left. And finally she says, being back in the Army is difficult. To have to pretend to be a soldier every day is difficult because I am not. I was very involved in my community in Toronto. That's how I knew people. I worked in the community garden. My kids were always out there with me when they could be. They loved it. The people I knew were awesome, and we always helped each other out. Now I can't even see my kids, and when I had a chance to go to them for Christmas, I was not given leave by my platoon sergeant. So I have been unable to see them except for the 2 days of Thanksgiving when Mario drove all 4 of them up here. I've been away from them for so long. I miss them very much. It's been 8 months since I was separated from them, and I don't know when I will be able to be with them again. That makes me nervous. It's scary. I had a loving community in Toronto. I was an emotionally healthy and supportive. It was an emotionally healthy and supportive environment. Here I'm isolated. I go to counseling every day and to group every other day. Even though I did not fill out the official application to obtain conscientious objector status, I consider myself a conscientious objector to all war. So, yeah. So this woman is, her whole family, you could say, is being tortured. It's shocking to hear the impact on her young kids. And from what I hearing and what I've seen happen with the other war resistors, I think it's predictable that she'll be sentenced to a minimum of 6 months in prison and possibly a year or even more by this heartless government who is, continues to persecute people who are doing the right thing. So I think it's important that we support Kimberly Rivera. There's still a week left for us to write letters to the command there, calling for leniency or calling for her freedom. And I'm actually trying to get a good address for us right now, so I'm sure that there's good information available about Kimberly on Courage to Resist. CourageToResist.org is one place you can go to look for information. And Bradley, always bradleymanning.org is one of the best activist websites you'll see, with constantly updated with good, actionable information. So aside from supporting these individuals, I think it's time, and a number of us in Veterans for Peace really want to start a campaign for amnesty for all those who refuse to participate in illegal wars, to participate in war crimes, to participate in torture, and for the whistleblowers. And the prospects of us actually winning such an amnesty in the current political environment is not great, I must say. But I think it's a righteous demand. In the meantime, we can support every individual war resistor, and we can't forget these people that are still hanging out there for doing, what many of us called on them to do and continue to call on them to do. And can't forget Kimberly Rivera or the rest of the war resistors who are fighting to stay in Canada or still underground in the United States. And of course, it's really important that we all rally around Bradley Manning. And once again, actually our bus is being organized from New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and possibly Connecticut, and several other places. You can go on the Bradley Manning website, bradleymanning.org, to find out about that. Some of us in Veterans for Peace are going to be helping to anchor a vigil throughout the summer, because Bradley's court-martial, which begins on June 3rd, is actually the judge predicting it's going to take 60 to 90 days. So it may go the entire summer. And I know the government's planning to call a bunch of classified witnesses. They have a list of 20 plus witnesses, CIA, top military intelligence, and others that are going to be testifying in secret. The public won't get to hear this testimony. They're actually going to be calling a John Doe witness who's going to be totally unnamed. He's a member of SEAL Team 6 that assassinated bin Laden. So supposedly this guy's going to say that, we were rummaging around bin Laden's headquarters, we found some stuff from WikiLeaks. So this will be proof that Bradley Manning was aiding the enemy. At least the court has ruled that the prosecution is going to have to prove that he had reason to believe, in other words, intent to aid the enemy. The prosecution was trying to get around even that. Anyway, let's do all we can to support our war resistors, and don't forget them. And Veterans for Peace is going to be stepping up our commitment to war resistors, all, and we'll be working very closely with Bradley Manning Support Network and Courage to Resist, and I encourage all of you to do the same. Thank you.
Yeah.